Awesome. Well, for those of you that just joined, welcome to Procurement Survivor, Surviving the End of Year Scramble. My name is Chloe DiCioso. I'm also joined by my colleague, Sam Savage. We're part of the Public Partnerships team here at Pavilion. And as many of you know, fiscal year can kind of feel like being in survival mode. Requests might pile up, timelines get shorter, and everyone suddenly remembers budget that they need to spend. And procurement teams are ultimately left trying to keep things moving while maintaining compliance and also serving their agencies. So today we're bringing three procurement leaders from different parts of the country really to talk about what actually happens during year end, what breaks, what works, and also what lessons that they've learned along the way. As we jump in, we have a few housekeeping notes here as well. Feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar using the chat or even the Q&A section here. We'll also save time with our panelists for a Q&A at the end of the session. And this recording will also be shared after the call so that you have a copy if you need to reference anything as well, or if you need to head out early. But first, we are going to start off with a quick poll here. And the question that we have for you all is, how would you describe fiscal year end at your agency? So let me just send that poll over to you here today. And also within the chat as well, if you want to type in your name, where you're joining from, would love to, know who's joining today as well. Awesome. We're seeing very kind of mixed results here, but nothing common predictable just yet. Awesome. I'll give folks a couple of seconds to answer and get those responses in. Awesome. Well, I will end the poll. We see that things are quite busy but manageable, but there's also some organized chaos and also pure survival mode. And it looks like we have many survivors within this webinar and also within our attendees as well. Well, now I'd love to introduce our amazing panel today. And so first we will be introducing Joseph Coco, who is the Director of Procurement at Montgomery County. We have Austin Rosenthal, Assistant Director of Purchasing at Tulsa Community College, and Mike Bagley, Purchasing Director from Jefferson County in New York. But, I'd love for all our panelists to go around just kind of to introduce yourselves as well. How you found your way into procurement and maybe one word that describes year end at your agency.
Well, I guess I'll start. Joseph Coco. I'm the Director of Procurement for the County of Montgomery in Pennsylvania. Um, what I have to say isn't going to be much different than what we're going to hear today. I got in procurement by accident. There was an opportunity there, and I just rolled into it. That was when I was working private. An opportunity opened up in public procurement, and it was, I'll say there was a transition period. As there is just learning just the rules and the regulations, for our area. But from that, it's been a great transition. I couldn't, imagine doing anything else. It's been a great career. And so with the one word is it's at our end, it's always crazy, but we'll get into our story with that throughout the presentation. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks so much, Joseph. And we can popcorn between Austin or Mike as well.
I can go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Austin Rosenthal, Assistant Director of Purchasing for Tulsa Community College. I've been in higher ed procurement in Oklahoma now for going on 14 years. And just like what Joseph was talking about earlier, I also fell into it. But it's been I've had more fun with it than I could have ever imagined. There's always something coming at you. And as I said, for the one word, I would actually go with two words, which is orchestrated chaos. We do a lot, and we'll talk more about it as we go, but we've done a lot to, kind of organize and streamline what we do. but within that, there's still bubbling chaos. So just like many of you are probably experiencing, it's a lot of the last minute, well, how on earth am I going to get this done in 2 weeks? So um, again, nice to meet everybody. Happy to share the experience.
Thanks so much, Austin. And now on to you, Mike.
All right, I'm Mike Bagley. I'm the purchasing director of Jefferson County, New York. The question I get the most is, where is that? So open up Google Maps and look to the east of Lake Ontario and just south of Canada, and that's where we are. So I'm originally from Florida, and my background is in healthcare leadership. And continue that when a few years ago when my family and I moved to New York, and like Joseph and Austin, I also just kind of fell into this. I was looking for something different, leadership role, and this position was available, and here I am. So never thought I would find myself in a government role, but I've enjoyed it. I've been in this position for 2.5 years now. And I do like the busyness of every day. Every day is unpredictable, as I'm sure most of everyone who's joined this call can experience and feels that as well. But I like that. I don't like the mundane, the routine, the every day is predictable type of scenario and setting. So this has been a great fit. And I would say in the breadth of the poll, I would say that our end of year processes now we've kind of moved from the chaos into busy but manageable now with some of the different things that we've implemented.
Awesome. Well, one thing that I'm seeming to hear as well is, end of year is both very similar among agencies, but there are some slight differences here. But I'd love to jump into things now and, really understand how you all are essentially approaching the end of year and the year-end scramble. But my first question to you all is, when someone who doesn't work in procurement asks what year-end is like, how do you explain it to them?
Well, it's interesting because I guess what a lot of people, if they really don't think about, is procurement is it's the end of the road. Everybody's had their requests. They've either acted on them or they didn't, and no one really seems to consider what happens downstream, what's required. And if you're talking, especially an end of a fiscal year, our county is on calendar year, so that means it gets busiest between the holiday time, and no one really has, again, even I don't even think they have the awareness of the effects on everybody downstream. They have no idea what procurement actually does, and we're just not flipping paper and pushing buttons and we're done. There's actually some work that goes into this, and it's we're really the ones getting dumped on. So it's I've always looked at it as unfair, but such is life, right? It's something we have to deal with and react to, and we've done a good job in our jurisdiction in handling it. So I for what it's worth, that's what we have, and we'd like to hear a little more about from my colleagues.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
I would liken it. I would ask, have you ever been on a roller coaster?
Mm.
That's really what it feels like. And just for an example, I love roller coasters. One of my favorite roller coasters is at Busch Gardens in Tampa called Tigers. So anybody in the area might be on the call has been on that. It's 70 miles an hour up, zero gravity at some point, and then it looks like the ride's over. You come back into like the waiting area and whatever, kind of go up, and then you do everything backwards at 70 miles an hour. So the ride's not over, and that happens about 3 times. That's really what the end of the year feels like. You feel like the ride's almost over, and then everything starts all over, and it might be completely what you're not expecting. So that's about the only roller coaster I've had to kind of stop. I've got 4 boys, and one of them is my roller coaster buddy, the oldest one who's 18. That's the only ride I've had to stop and kind of get my wits about me once I got off. And there are days where it literally feels like that when we're done especially towards the end of the year, and you get done with work, kind of just take a deep breath and hope when I go home it's a little less chaotic than it is in the office. So,
Mhm.
but that's kind of the analogy I think I would use that would best describe the year-end processes.
I love the roller coaster analogy. And for you, Austin, is it the same in higher ed as well?
Yeah, I think roller coaster is the perfect metaphor for what
Mhm.
we go through because
Mhm.
it's again it's the fun part about higher education and the downfall of higher education sometimes is there's so many facets to what we do.
Mhm.
While our purchasing department's centralized and we do this one thing for everybody, everybody's doing something a little different. Everybody has a little different take on it. The science folks do their thing, business and technology do their thing, nursing does their thing.
Mhm.
There are a lot of different disciplines that are all coming together in one place. So sometimes being on the same page or trying to understand where they're at can be challenging. And that's
Mhm.
probably our biggest thing is there's just so many different mindsets in place. It's just trying to how do we regroup and how do we get to the same place? And just like what Mike was talking about, once you get to the end of it, then there's a whole new set of fun at the beginning of the year.
Mhm.
So, right now we're talking year-end Survivor. There's a beginning of the year Survivor because now all of a sudden everybody's got their budget and they're like, okay, I've got to spend now because I've got money. And they're like, well, just pump your brakes. It'll be okay.
Mhm.
But, we always say that, I always get folks that come to say, well, you must be excited. In higher education, it's summer, so it must be quiet. And I'm like, oh no, that's our year end. But as I said, we try to manage a lot of those expectations and try to make sure that we speak plainly and try to get the word out so that we're all on the same page. Again, the big thing that we stress at the end of the day here is community is our middle name, and
Mhm.
we're all trying to get to the same place. So yeah, there's a lot of managing expectations and again trying to make sure that the communication is clear.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really love that idea of community, like where you're all working together essentially to get things done. And you touched upon it as well, mentioning, folks discover budget or maybe they need to spend that budget before the year end. But just curious, among all three of you, what tends to create the most stress when it comes to year end?
I think for me it's timelines.
Mm-hmm.
It's we've known that June 30th is the end of the year for 12 months. And it's the folks that are coming to us. Like I just had one come to me on Monday saying, "Hey, can we get something on the board agenda?"
Mm-hmm.
Which is in 2 weeks. Well, that's a lot of work and hoops to jump through to get things through. Again, that's most of our problems are timing related.
Mm-hmm.
It's trying to get things. A lot, not a lot of unusual purchases, but a lot of, oh my gosh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And it's trying to, for the people that are doing it, right, it's, trying to calm them and, again, measure expectations and say, level set with them and say, hey, you're fine. This is what we need to do. This is how we'll get it done. And for the folks that are struggling with it a little more, it's like, okay, this is how we need, this is what it is, and that's why we send out a lot of communication on this, memos, banners on our landing page, things like that to manage those expectations.
Mhm.
But again, it's most of the time it's just meeting those deadlines and just, as long as they know what the guardrails are, we can work within that.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. And is it similar for you both at counties as well?
Yeah, I think, and I saw, seen a few comments come through. The
Mhm.
policies is a big one.
Mhm.
Towards the end of the year, and there's money to be spent, and a requisition comes through, and it exceeds our threshold for three quotes, for example. For us, it's $10,000,
Mhm.
and they want to end of the year. Let's try to get it through, and we have to pause and say, okay, well, we need two additional quotes before we can move this through.
Mhm.
So that's one example. We get it. It is a lot of reiteration of the purchasing policies in general. I think it has gotten better over the past couple of years, fortunately. But part of that is doing another comment it looked like from Vanessa about a cutoff date. And so that's one
Mhm.
thing that we have done here in the last couple of years. There is a deadline to submit requisitions that are not related to bids or RFPs, which most of the time they're taken care of well before the end of the year. Um, but anything not related to an RFP or bid, a requisition, our cutoff now, our deadline is November 30th.
Mm.
Our end of the year, it's a little bit different than Austin's, and probably most agencies are the same way. It's our fiscal year matches the calendar year. And the previous situation here in purchasing before I came in was the deadline was December 15th,
Mm.
but it wasn't really enforced. So it was kind of a gentle, hopefully you get it in, a requisition in by December 15th. But if you put one in December 30th, we'll still accommodate it. And I didn't think that was fair to our department or the buyers in particular who see those requisitions and then have to scramble last minute, especially during the holiday season where you're working on less days because you have holidays built into that. A lot of people are on vacation. And so one of the first things that I implemented was moving that date to November 30th.
Mhm.
And I didn't receive a lot of pushback. I actually didn't receive any pushback on that. Fortunately, the departments have been very cooperative, which I really appreciate, understanding the why behind that initiative. And we haven't had any issues at all. And we'll still get some that trickle in, first week of December or so. And then it's just kind of a first come, first served basis type of thing. So
Mm.
kind of we'll get to them when we get to them because we're also trying to close out POs that have been open for the year. And we're working on other things to truly close out the year. So, but we have established that deadline and it's gone very well. It went over very well as well. I communicated it ahead of time. So I think that helped to get some buy-in as well. But at least here we didn't have any pushback with that deadline, fortunately.
Mm. I love that. It's, you
Mhm.
see what's coming. The challenge comes from requests coming in too late, but being proactive about it, really communicating and kind of pushing towards those standards makes a lot of sense.
Right,
Um,
and that's one thing that we did at Montgomery County some years
mm.
ago is much like Mike did, we pushed that date a lot earlier,
Mhm.
and it took a couple years to change the mindset. But when we get the requests in, earlier, we're able to handle them and process them more efficiently and
Mhm.
effectively. And then, there's always the last minute stuff, but it kind of positions us to be able to handle those stragglers a lot better.
Mhm.
We haven't, we've, what I opened up and said, crazy. That was the old way. The new way is a lot better for the team as a whole. Um, the other issue we deal with is with our fiscal year being on the calendar year is dealing with a lot of the state and federal grant programs
Mhm.
that end June 30th. We get an onslaught at the beginning of July when the funds do become available. So that's it's the beginning of a year issue is more of an issue with the grant items just because everybody's kicking off, our HHS departments are kicking off all of their new programs for the new fiscal year. So it's, in our area, we kind of get slammed twice, but
Mhm.
again, the message is if you're prepared for it, we know that July it comes around and you really can't do much to change it. That's just a fact. But we do the best to manage it when it does come down.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. It's, always being proactive and really understanding what's coming and just kind of jumping ahead of things as well. What I'd love to do next is just kind of get into some stories as well. But I'd love to learn from each of you, what the craziest year-end request you've ever received was.
Yeah, mine wasn't so much a particular purchase. It was grant money left over from COVID, um, 7 digits that needed to be approved, use it or lose it.
Mhm.
And we already had the bids out and awarded, and it gone through legislation. And the last thing that needed to happen was having the POs approved. Um, and Christmas time, we usually go down to that holiday season. We usually go back down to Florida and visit family and friends. And on the way back, I was getting phone calls as we're driving through Pennsylvania, stopping at Hershey Park, and doing that whole touristy thing on the way back, so we hadn't been there. Getting calls from administration, and that we have an international airport, and getting for different reasons, other substantial amounts of money sitting in my workflow to be approved. So,
Mm.
and that's to be expected. That's part of the responsibilities of the job. And the last workflow for POs to be works to be converted to POs. I'm kind of the last line of defense. So if I don't approve it, it doesn't get converted into a PO. So no pressure, right? No pressure at all. So we get home. I remember we got home about 10:45 at night, being on the road all day, and opened up my laptop before I even helped unpack the car and get everybody to bed. I was on my laptop going through and approving the remaining requisitions that were in my workflow, including the ARPA money that was sitting in there. So it's just par for the course. And that was my first year end as far as the POs and things are. So kind of baptism by fire. Now I know. Every New Year's Eve, I don't necessarily stay up to watch the ball drop. I stay up to watch the POs and make sure they're all approved and everything goes through smoothly. So that's kind of my celebration for entering a new year, is my workflow is empty.
I love that. The PO New Year's watch with millions of dollars sitting in your queue. How about you, Austin and Joseph?
Well, I would say, I have to echo a lot of Mike's comments there. We get a lot of those, just kind of weird. I've got to spend my money by
Mhm.
June 30th requests, or hey, I've got to get this encumbered at least. It's a lot of stuff like that. But if I had to pick a weird purchase, it would be a solar powered picnic table. While not a costly endeavor, it sure was strange. And I always get questions about, well, how could you allow a solar powered picnic table? Well, nothing in the state statutes that say that we couldn't. The students, to their credit, with the help of their faculty advisor, and again, this is at a different institution, I should preface that. Uh, but the students did their part. The faculty advisor made sure that they did exactly what we would ask any of our, faculty or staff that were entering requests. They did the exact same thing. They went out and got their quotes and made their selection, justified their selection, and we ended up with a solar powered picnic table. Now, at that institution, we also were known as Tree Campus USA. So we did park the solar powered picnic table underneath a tree, underneath the tallest building on campus. So, how functional it was, I can't speak to that, but that was probably the strangest.
I love it. Did it ever work? What were they even using the table for?
Just to charge your phone. And at the time, now the technology's changed, but at the time, it only charged one kind of phone on the wireless pads. But it's gotten better, or my understanding is that it's gotten better. Obviously I've moved on to TCC, but yeah, at the time you'd go plug in your USB at least, and it would charge your phone for however much charge the solar power picnic table was able to pick up.
Well, that saving phones one table at a time.
And I see in the chat that there are other folks that have bought solar power picnic tables too, so I don't feel so alone now.
Oh, wow. How about you, Joseph? What has been the strangest for you?
Well, I'm going to echo some of the same comments as Mike. The COVID and ARPA fund years, those end of years were unique in just the volume and the size of the requests that came down, and just the level of the higher level people that were involved at within our entity, just to ensure that some of these funds were committed, because it was the free money, right? You know, we truly had to commit to it and spend it. So that was those they were quite unique and different than what we had gotten used to. But this wasn't an end of year, but it's one of the crazier things that we do buy, and it's something that my assistant director refers to as ratsicles. We do have a facility that houses, Pennsylvania-born animals, and usually they take them in if they're injured and can no longer be in the wild. But um, we get frozen rodents for feeding these animals, and it's there's not that many places you can get them, but it's one of the crazier things that we do end up buying. So never would have thought that. We don't own a zoo, but we do house animals, and they do need to be fed. So.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like, especially looking at the chat, everyone has had either similar or on-theme stories as well. And we all kind of touched upon this earlier within our discussion as well, understanding, how to educate departments, but also understanding, how we can push deadlines back a bit. So things aren't in this kind of rush. But, I'd love to deep go into, what actually works for you all. And you mentioned a few of those stories too, but what has, greatly kind of reduced that end of year stress for you all, and how have you implemented that within your agency?
I would say for us, it's communication and setting expectations ahead of time. And that's not an end all be all. Um, because then it becomes end of year and then sometimes that communication is forgotten, but that might be human nature, part of that as well. But trying to get ahead of the curve and communicating ahead of time and setting those expectations, especially if you are moving a deadline or establishing a deadline, having that communication months ahead of time um, will help garner that support. And like I said, for our department, fortunately, the departments and administration were completely on board with that, which I'm grateful for.
Mhm.
Something else, so we have a newer administration team as well. And so the last budget season, I asked to be more involved in the budget. So kind of ended up at a compromise to where I don't fortunately, go to all of the operational budget meetings for every single department. But we do have it was implemented last year, a new capital budget spreadsheet that administration sends that all the department heads have to fill out. So I do I'm more involved in especially the capital projects the year before. Once that capital report is finalized for the next fiscal year, they're very good about communicating with me, sending me a report to the point now when the county administrator comes into my office, I know that a special project is coming. But I appreciate the communication as well to let us know what's going on. We've had some really unique projects lately that, special projects from administration. So, but they've been fun to work on. They're different. And we've had to tap into AI quite a bit to figure out what needs to go into the RFP and the bid if we just can't find a lot of resources elsewhere. But being more involved in the capital purchases has been a huge help. So in the next physical year, we're not blindsided as much. It still happens from time to time, but not as much of, oh, hey, I need this, $3 million project or whatever it is that's going to be months. And here we have a very short season to work outside just because of the weather. So contractors fill up very quickly with work once the season turns in March or April, and then everything pretty much shuts down for public works outside in October to November. So there's a lot of proactive mindsets and collaboration that has to happen between sometimes administration, but definitely purchasing and the other departments that are more involved in those projects. But being involved ahead of time and knowing ahead of time kind of what's in the funnel of what's going to come down the following year has definitely helped out a lot for preparation from our side.
That makes sense. Lots of, proactive planning and having that visibility into what's going to happen later on in the year. And I know you mentioned, being able to push back those deadlines too, that helped you all at the agency. And just curious, from a change management perspective, how you were able to introduce that idea, and get folks on board to it.
At first, it was probably one of my first department head meetings when I started. I made that known that that was something on my radar that I wanted to look at. I mean, I'd only been in this role maybe a couple months, but it was a hot topic within purchasing. So I knew it needed to be listened to and addressed. And the more that I was told about the mistakes that would happen, not necessarily purchasing. Sometimes the departments too would try to rush and get a last second requisition in before the end of the year. And sometimes the specs were wrong.
Mhm.
We ordered it correctly, but the specs were wrong. And sometimes the order went through incorrectly just because of the rush behind it.
Mhm.
And so that's how I framed it is, help us help you. We want to order the right, whatever it is that you're ordering.
Yeah.
Um, but we need time to do that because we're also working on other end of year activities as well.
Mhm.
So that's really how I framed it. But I did it probably in February or March of that year,
Mhm.
then announced it in August. So everybody had time, and in between that, if I had an opportunity, I would mention it again and then send out an email to make it official. I believe it was August or September. So folks had time to look at their next really 3 months, right? And see, okay, well, I still have this money. What should I spend it on before December 1st? So
Mhm.
it was strategic in how we did it, and it seems to have gone over well. But I also think they also had a year or so, almost a year to prepare for that. So it
Yeah.
wasn't, oh, by the way, this is now official. And oh, by the way, you've got a couple months to figure out how you're going to spend whatever money you have left for the year. So
Mhm.
prepping them and then framing it to helping us help them avoid mistakes with those orders when they go through. So that it seemed whether that was the magic touch or not, I don't know, but it did go through pretty well, the communication and then the implementation of that.
That makes sense. Being able to prep and then also frame. And curious to Joseph and Austin, what's been most helpful for you all, during the end of the fiscal year?
Well, one of the things we kind of do this year round, but it's especially critical at the end, is watching the different workloads of the people in our
Mhm.
department.
Mhm.
Um, it's and adjusting, and allowing everybody to help each other out. Um, and just looking to see who's got how many solicitations on their desk at a given time.
Yeah.
Um, what departments are the requests coming from? And
Mhm.
it's easy for a given buyer to be overwhelmed if you don't keep an eye on that. So one of the way we're organized in such a way that the department's cross-trained so everybody can kind of step in and assist. So that
Mhm.
is one of the things we do throughout the year, but it's especially critical at year end, just to make sure that people don't get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Um, again, we did push back the request for end of year requests to earlier in the year. And you know, kind of like what Mike said, it after a little bit of time, people are conditioned and they're aware, they're a little more aware of it. So it gets a little easier every year after that. And then, one thing that we just started doing again, it's kind of echoing some of the comments Mike made that we have been getting together with our at the end of year before the next budget is passed,
Mhm.
is sitting down with our CFO and getting a feel for what is the capital equipment that's gonna be coming down.
Mhm.
Um, be it heavy equipment, be it vehicles, whatever, just to get a handle on what's coming down because seem to be some of everybody likes their vehicles, and as soon as the new year, right, when can I get my new vehicle?
Mhm.
And that's especially a tight window for us because it's kind of end of model year. So it's a transitional time for the auto manufacturers. And we really have a short window to take advantage of any state contracts
Mhm.
to utilize those savings. So that's really like the main things that we kind of just to keep everything focused and kind of and trying to head off the staff from becoming overwhelmed as we get into the holidays.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a lot of strategic planning, understanding timelines, but also being able to segment, your departments and understanding who may have more needs than others as well. And curious, Austin, is that similar for you as well,
Yeah,
at college?
I'd have to definitely echo a lot of what Joseph and Mike said.
Mhm.
Because we approach both of what they touched on. From a communication standpoint,
Mhm.
we only have, so many stakeholders in our process daily, compared to the 2,000 employees that are at TCC.
Mm.
What we discovered is that in our initial communication, we were dealing specifically with our handful of stakeholders. But what we found is by expanding the scope of who we're reaching out to, we were able to, get a little more buy-in and a little more understanding. It's like, okay, this is what we're after. Because for some of our internal customers, will be honest, they don't understand it as well as we do. And rightfully so. They don't have to deal with it as much as we do. So explaining to their supervisor what we're after, sometimes there's a little there's a something's lost in translation. So by touching everybody or giving everybody, that information and touching on what we need, that helps, streamline the expectation. We also found that there's a specific way that TCC employees get messages. And when I got here, it's like, well, you communicate through these emails, you communicate through the system emails because we use e-procurement in our world. So we thought that was the way to go, but I learned that, hey, there's this dedicated newsletter that everybody on campus reads, and I was surprised how many people actually read it daily. So that was like, that's our way in. And by going that route, we were able to increase the, buy-in, if you will, in what we were after. Now, to the point of streamlining, what we're doing on our end, not only are we, seeing what we do, like, Joseph was talking about, well, how many solicitations are on, this buyer's desk? How many, requisitions are we processing? Not only are we looking at what we're doing, we're looking at the load on our internal customer and how can we help them get through this faster. So, we analyze where bottlenecks are, and in the process, we analyze, what we're trying to buy to see can we make it more consistent across the campus. So there's a lot of, both of those communication and, managing workload that we take on to get through not only the end of the year, but the beginning of the next year.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. No, I love that you're able to find, that platform that you could use that people listen to as well and kind of jump on that too. And I'd love to, understand what kind of advice you have for folks, especially in the room today. But, if you had to give one or two pieces of advice to other procurement teams when it comes to heading into year end, what would you give them?
I would start off with communication. I think
Mm.
that's mission critical. Um, Too often I've experienced it not only for myself, but I've watched other purchasing departments and other agencies do it where we get a little siloed because, it's kind of like we like what Mike's touched on, what Joseph touched on. Everybody's, throwing stuff at us at the last minute and, expecting it to be done yesterday. Um, but so by, making sure that we're communicating it and having the patience to communicate it, that's also important. Because
Mhm.
sometimes we're like, I've done this now for going on 14 years. I've said the same thing every year. So it's how do I make it sound like this is the first time I'm ever explaining year end to somebody? Because if I come at them with oh gosh, just get it in by June 30th, they're not going to buy into it as much as if I explain, hey, this is why we're doing it. This is how the funding works. This is what the expectation is from you.
Mhm.
If we're having a dialogue with them and if we're putting that information out there and it's clear and concise, um, that helps our internal customer understand what they need to do. And again, as we've gotten through this process of, expanding on this communication, we found that it gets better with each year.
Mm, that makes sense. It's like communication, but also that
Yeah,
community aspect of,
Yeah,
we're
absolutely.
doing this because we're trying to get to XYZ.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're on the
that's
same page with them. Though we're not their adversary. We're their partner.
for sure. And how about you, Mike and Joseph?
so Austin, you're not the person that your university pays to say no and stop the process, right?
Absolutely not.
And that it seems like that's how we're viewed, a lot of the times, right? We're the
Mm,
ones who are stopping the process. But a lot of the times in public procurement, what the departments don't understand is we're trying to keep everybody out of jail too. That's part
yeah.
of what we do. Um, I'm going to echo what Austin said. Communication is big, especially important. And I'm just going to add another reason in there is, there is turnover within, within the county. And in the departments, you do have new people in different roles who, maybe haven't gone through a year end.
Mhm.
Don't know why or, how crazy it can be. So that's why, I think the communication, it can't be a once and done, it has to be kind of reiterated. So, when we have new people in new roles, across our county, that, these people are at least aware of it. The one message that we drill into people is that, if you have a question, just pick up the phone or email us or something, right?
Mhm.
Because it's a lot easier to do something right, the first time, than it is trying to do cleanup because they do it improperly. So, you know, again, like I said, I just wanted to add into that, into Austin's comments, right? The communication, just, to help, in fairness to the departments who have new people in new roles, right? There's always new people that are gonna be coming to a year end, right? And just need to be reminded or told.
Mhm. That makes sense. It's really that collaborative process. Like you all are working together essentially to
Mhm.
stay compliant, but also still to get what you need really at the end of the day. And you're not the Department of No. You are a strategic partner. So that makes a lot of sense. And curious for you, Mike, too, what advice you have for folks in the audience today.
All right. Besides communication and collaboration, those are probably, I think, probably if you pulled everybody in this webinar, it'd probably be at the top for most. I would say for me to go to work along with that in step is to embrace technology.
Mm.
Um, that's one way that we've been able to stay organized throughout the year. We have a spreadsheet that I meet with my buyers once a week, go over projects, who's assigned to it, what the status is. We color code it. I like the colors, so we color code, based on if it's out of our hands, we color it, something for that month. If it's done, it's a different color. When we move on to the next month, and those blues is what we color code. The ones that are done, they fall off. And I do the
Mhm.
same with my account clerks too, because they have different roles and responsibilities. So that helps us stay organized. We've also moved to e-procurement as well. We also have record retention that we've introduced in the last year. Also, we've also started using Pavilion countywide, which has also been a great asset. So all of these technology and AI is another one. I was on the committee for the AI implementation and policy. So there's a lot of resources out there with technology involved. 2.5 years ago, my first day when I walked in, everything was on paper. I was signing POs by hand, give it to the buyers, and they had to basically do double entries with those POs back into our ERP system. And that's just the way it was always done, but
Mhm.
it wasn't efficient. And so one thing I like to do is identify what I classify time wasting activities and say, okay, well, how do we enhance that? How do we move that forward so we can actually be more efficient at our jobs and maximize our time? And so there were some glaring things where it was all on paper. About 100% of our processes were on paper. And now we've transitioned to the point to now we're effectively running our bid process from beginning to end paperless
Mhm.
uh, in the last 2.5 years. So I couldn't have done it without my team. I'm sure they questioned my sanity at times when, all right, we're going to do this now. Because I get excited with these new enhancements, the technologies, and a lot of it has had to go before the board for board resolutions. And our e-procurement, the county absorbs that cost, so there's no barrier to entry for the local vendors. And because I knew that would, if we want to increase our participation in our bids, if we're going to charge, especially in a smaller rural area, a
Mhm.
lot of our community members that own businesses just don't have that ability to pay X amount of dollars a month or a year. So I'm grateful for the support and for those that have trusted the vision that we've, kind of step by step taken to get to the point to where we are now. There's still a lot to be done, but I would say embrace technology and use it as your friend. and that can help ease a lot of the pain points as well.
Mm, that's awesome. No, I love all the themes that we're hearing here today. It's that mixture of communication, also careful planning, being open to that collaboration, and also new technologies too that can assist. And so just kind of outline those themes we're hearing here as well, and transparency as well. So thank you so much, for the advice and also the stories that you provided over the past, 30, 40 minutes. And for those that are joining today, I know it's kind of a mixture of folks that are new to Pavilion, or maybe, you may have known us solely as a cooperative contract search tool, but just kind of to give a brief overview as well as how Pavilion could also assist with year end. We've kind of expanded beyond cooperative purchasing as well over the past few months, really assisting agencies with a range of purchases, including informal purchases. But I'd say one of the biggest changes to Pavilion is giving you all procurement teams visibility into what your departments are searching for, being able to implement guidance for your departments on the platform, and also helping them get vendors and get those quotes quickly before the end of the fiscal year. And one thing I'd love to preview for you all, this is pretty new to the platform, but we've recently released a new Chrome extension. It's called Pavilion Buy It Faster. So if we head to Pavilion Buy It Faster right here on the Chrome store, you'll see here. Essentially, this is a new extension that whenever you are browsing a vendor's website, we will note if there are cooperative contracts available from that vendor. So just kind of to help speed things up a bit when it comes to research. But with that, we are going to go back into our Q&A session. This is kind of a quick quote from Jed Greenfield from the city of Houston. But I'd love to open up to the attendees. If you have any questions for our amazing panelists, feel free to type it in the chat. We also have a Q&A portion here too. So we will be monitoring and are happy to answer your questions. And I will monitor the chat as well. And maybe if you don't have any questions, any comments too, or, if you have any pieces of advice for other attendees, I'd love to see them too. And if there are no questions, that's okay as well. But I'll give folks maybe 30 seconds just to get those in. Awesome. Great to hear that, Stacy. And we appreciate you making time today as well, just to jump in out of your busy schedule. All right, questions going once or twice. Let's see. We have a question from Vanessa here. We tell our users that if their orders are not received on or by the end of the fiscal year, that we cannot apply the funds to the current fiscal year budget. Is this what you all do, or does the budget year depend on when the PO is issued and not when items or the order is received?
I'll hop in on that one. We generally tell them June 30th is kind of an absolute deadline. Again, it kind of goes back to that clear and concise communication. We give them kind of an end all be all of June 30th. However, we are reasonable. We understand things happen. I've had orders that were placed on June 1st that the supplier was not good, or they did something, or something happened, whatever the case may be. And the product ended up being delivered on July 15th. In some of those cases, we do have the ability to, work within that. So without going into too much detail for this call, we've developed processes to make sure that, we account for these things. From an audit standpoint, we still make sure that it's posting in the correct fiscal year and that we're accounting for those funds correctly. But at the same time, from the end user perspective, we're trying to make sure that they have what they need so they're not saddled with something that they didn't anticipate because it was out of their control. So, essentially, yes, we do give them a firm deadline, but we also have the device or the tools and processes built to account for it.
And from our, within our county, some of it depends on whether it's operating or capital budget. We do have multi-year projects that are handled a little bit differently, but generally speaking, if the funds are encumbered by the end of the year, the departments are good. Our controller's office issues, the cutoff date, as they refer to it, at the beginning of the year, as to when the last day that invoices from the previous fiscal year can be entered. So usually there's about a month there for orders that were, the funds were encumbered before the end of the year for things to be received, invoices applied, to the previous year.
And tariffs lately have also been kind of a hot topic as well. Some may have felt that as well. So we'll get a quote and then we get, the invoice at the end of the year, and all of a sudden the tariff charge went from 4% to 12% or something. And so we have to pause that and question it, but the calendar doesn't stop. We don't actually close our books until March, the beginning of March. So there is some wiggle room there for those types of things. A lot of times the capital projects, again, because of that window of seasonality here, they may not be wrapped up in November and they'll carry over until the next year. So we see a lot of that as well for mostly capital projects, but OpEx expenses generally are taken care of by 12/31 and generally don't carry over as much. It's mostly the capital projects or vehicles or capital expenses that we may see carry over into the next year.
Super helpful. And I'll pose to attendees as well. Any other questions too before we wrap up? Give folks a couple of seconds here. Awesome. Well, before we kind of end things for today, I know, as I mentioned, a lot of changes have occurred within Pavilion as well. So if folks need any assistance kind of navigating through those changes, I have a poll here as well if you kind of need a refresher walkthrough or, are trying to discover ways to help your team or even customize the platform a bit for you all. Feel free to answer this poll and our team will follow up with you just to make sure that everything's set up for you correctly. I'll let you all answer here. But I'd love to thank our amazing panelists today, Austin, Joseph, Mike, for all the wisdom and advice that you have given us attendees, around the end of the fiscal year. And we always appreciate, the work that you all do, as well as those in the audience today, helping your agencies and communities keep running, especially during this time of year. So really appreciate it. If you have any questions after this webinar as well, we will send a follow-up email again with the recording. But thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to see you next time. But good luck with the end of the fiscal year as well. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.